The wind howled through the narrow alleys of Blackthorn Village, carrying with it the sharp sting of the approaching winter. The sky was heavy, with gray clouds threatening a storm that would soon blanket the ground with snow in the distance. The towering silhouette of Eldenwood Castle loomed over the valley like a silent sentinel. Lila Harrow, a servant in one of the wealthiest merchants' households, tightened her threadbare cloak around her shoulders as she made her way home. Her worn boots barely protected her feet from the freezing mud beneath them, but she didn't care. She was used to discomfort, to hard days and sleepless nights. Survival was her only goal, and she knew better than to wish for anything more. Life as a servant had been her reality since she was a child, sold into servitude to pay her late father's debts. Now at 21, Elle had resigned herself to her station. Her hands were calloused. Her back often ached from endless scrubbing and lifting, and her spirit was weary. But despite it all, she remained kind-hearted and quietly defiant. It was this quiet defiance that had earned her both the grudging respect and the scorn of her mistress, Lady Rena. Rena was vain, ruthless, and obsessed with her own comfort. She barely noticed Elle except to bark orders, but Elea had learned to navigate her moods, finding solace in small moments of freedom, when she could slip away from the grand house and walk the forest paths alone tonight. However, she wouldn't make it to the forest. As she turned down the dark road that led to her small quarters, behind Lady Rowena's manor, she noticed something unusual. A figure lying motionless on the side of the road. Leia's heart quickened in a village as poor as Blackthorn strangers were rare, and anyone lying unconscious in the mud was either gravely injured or worse. For a moment she had hesitated, torn between fear and compassion. "Help them, La," she whispered to herself. Tightening her cloak around her shoulders, she approached cautiously, her footsteps quiet. Against the frozen ground, the figure was a man dressed in dark, mud-streaked clothes. His breathing was shallow, his face pale and smeared with blood. His hands, rough and strong, were clenched into fists, even in unconsciousness. Sister Viola said softly. Kneeling beside him, she touched his shoulder gently, but he didn't stir. A quick glance told her he had no weapons, but his attire was strange, not that of a farmer or merchant. His cloak was made of fine wool, though it was torn and bloodied, and his boots were sturdy and well crafted. Whoever he was, he didn't belong in Blackthorn. Elle bit her lip, glancing around to see if anyone else had noticed the man. The street was deserted. Night was falling quickly, and she knew she couldn't leave him here. "Come on," she muttered, slipping an arm under his shoulders. "You're too heavy to carry, but I'll get you somewhere safe with great effort." She managed to drag him off the road and into the narrow path that led to her quarters. It wasn't much, just a small room behind the kitchen with a straw mattress and a rickety table. But it was warm, and it was safe once inside. Ella lit a small lantern and rolled the man onto her mattress. His breathing was shallow but steady, and she saw now that he had a deep gash along his side. The wound was crusted with dried blood, and the fabric around it was soaked through. She worked quickly, fetching water from the basin and tearing strips from an old linen apron to use as bandages. She cleaned the wound as best she could, wincing every time he groaned in pain. "Who are you?" she whispered as she worked, studying his face. He was young, probably in his late 20s, with a strong jawline and sharp features. His dark hair was matted with blood, but there was a quiet strength in his expression, even in unconsciousness. Ella had no idea what had happened to him, but she couldn't deny the strange feeling that washed over her as she cared for him. It wasn't pity or fear. It was something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. The man didn't wake that night, but by the next morning his condition had improved. Ella was scrubbing the floors of Lady Rowena's kitchen when she heard a soft groan coming from her quarters. She rushed back to find the man sitting up on the mattress, his hand pressed to his side as he winced in pain. "You're awake," she said, relief flooding her voice. His eyes met hers, and for a moment he simply stared at her, as if trying to place her face. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Blackthorn Village," Ella said, kneeling beside him. "I found you on the road last night. You were injured, so I brought you here." He looked around the small room, his gaze sharp, despite his weakened state. "You saved me," he said after a moment, his voice quieter. "I couldn't just leave you there," she said, flushing slightly under his intense stare. "Do you remember what happened to you?" The man hesitated, his brow furrowing. "I was ambushed," he said slowly, as if piecing the memory together. "A group of men mercenaries, I think they took everything." His hand instinctively went to his hip, where a sword might have hung. His expression darkened when he realized it was gone. "Why would mercenaries attack you?" Ella asked cautiously. The man's gaze flicked back to hers, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said simply, "I was traveling alone." Ella frowned, sensing there was more to his story, but she didn't press him. "You need rest," she said. "Standing, your wound is deep and you lost a lot of blood. I'll bring you some food." He nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Thank you," he said quietly. Over the next few days, Ella cared for the stranger in secret, bringing him food and tending to his wound. Whenever she could slip away from her duties, he introduced himself as Eden, though he offered little else about his past. At first, Ella thought he was simply a traveler who had fallen victim to bad luck. But as he recovered, she began to notice things. His sharp reflexes, the way his eyes scanned every room, as if assessing threats, and the way he carried himself, even injured, with a quiet authority. He wasn't just a traveler. One evening, as they sat together in the dim light of her quarters, Ella finally asked the question that had been nagging at her since the night she found him. "Eden," she said carefully, "who are you, really?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable for a long moment. He didn't answer. Then he sighed, leaning back against the wall. "You're perceptive," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I suppose I owe you the truth." Leia's heart raced as he hesitated, as if weighing how much to tell her. "My name isn't Eden," he admitted. "It's Alden Darrow." Ella frowned, the name unfamiliar to her. "Should I know that name?" Alden's eyes darkened and he gave a bitter laugh. "You should. I'm the King of Eldenwood." Her breath caught, and she stared at him in stunned silence. Ella froze, her mind struggling to process what Alden had just said. The King of Elden. What seemed impossible here, sitting on her humble straw mattress, dressed in tattered clothes, with a deep gash in his side, was the man who ruled the realm, a man whose name carried both reverence and fear across the kingdom. Her immediate instinct was to laugh, to dismiss the claim as the delusion of a wounded stranger. But there was something in Alden's eyes, a mixture of weariness and defiance, that told her he was telling the truth. "You're the king," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes," Alden replied simply, his gaze steady. "But how? Why are you here? Why would the king be lying half dead on the side of a road in Blackthorn Village?" Her words came out in a rush, confusion and disbelief swirling in her chest. Alden sighed, leaning back against the wall. "It's a long story," he said, his voice heavy. But you deserve the truth. You saved my life." He closed his eyes briefly, as though gathering his thoughts. Then began my father. King Henrik ruled Eldenwood for over 30 years. He was a just man, but his reign was not without enemies. The noble family who surrounded the crown always sought more power, more influence. They whispered in the shadows, plotted behind closed doors. And when my father died 3 years ago, they turned their eyes to me. Alden's jaw tightened, his fists clenching. I was young, inexperienced. They saw me as a pawn, someone they could control, but I refused to bend to their schemes. I enacted reforms, broke alliances with corrupt lords, and worked to strengthen the kingdom from within. It made me powerful allies, but also dangerous enemies. Ella listened intently, her heart pounding, as she began to grasp the gravity of what he was saying. About a month ago, I received word of a conspiracy, a group of nobles planning to overthrow me and seize the throne. I didn't know who I could trust, so I decided to leave the castle under the guise of traveling to a neighboring province. I hoped to uncover the traitors from the outside, where their reach couldn't silence me. He hesitated, his expression darkening, but they were ahead of me. They sent mercenaries to ambush my convoy. My men, my most loyal guards. They were slaughtered. I barely escaped with my life. Alden looked at Ella. His gray eyes filled with a pain that sent a chill through her. I've been wandering ever since, trying to avoid capture, trying to find a way to take back my kingdom. And now, here I am in your care. The room fell silent as Ella absorbed his story. She wanted to doubt him, to insist that this was all some elaborate fabrication, but the sincerity in his voice, the haunted look in his eyes, left no room for doubt. "If what you're saying is true," she said slowly, "then you're in more danger than I realized. If these mercenaries are still looking for you—" "They are," Alden said grimly, "and they won't stop until they've finished what they started." Leia's hands trembled, and she clasped them tightly in her lap. "Then why come here? Blackthorn is nothing but a poor village on the edge of the realm. Why not go somewhere safer? Because this is the last place they'd expect to find me." Alden replied, "I thought I could disappear here just long enough to figure out my next move." Ella stared at him, her mind racing. She had spent her entire life serving others, never questioning her place in the world. And now fate had brought the king himself into her home, placing her in the middle of a conflict she didn't understand. "I should turn you in," she said suddenly, her voice shaking. "If anyone finds out I've been hiding you, if Lady Rowena finds out she couldn't finish the thought." "You could," Alden said quietly, "and I wouldn't blame you. But if you do everything I've worked for, everything my father built will be lost. Eldenwood will fall into the hands of men who care nothing for its people." His words cut through her like a blade. Ella wanted to believe she could simply walk away, that she had no part to play in this. But as she looked at Alden, at the man who had risked everything for his kingdom, she felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope the days that followed were a blur of secrecy and tension. Ella continued to care for Alden, bringing him food and tending to his wound in the quiet hours of the night. During the day, she went about her duties at Lady Rowena's manor, her heart pounding with every passing moment. She had always been careful to avoid drawing attention to herself. But now, every glance, every whispered conversation, felt like a potential threat. Ella, one of the other servants. A girl named Mara said one afternoon, as they scrubbed the kitchen floors, "You've been awfully distracted lately. Something on your mind?" "No." Ella replied quickly, avoiding Mara's gaze. Just tired. Mara frowned but didn't press further still. Ella couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, waiting for her to slip up. Meanwhile, Alden grew stronger with each passing day. Though he was still weak from his injuries, his determination never wavered. He spent hours poring over maps and notes, trying to piece together the identities of those who had betrayed him. "I can't stay hidden forever," he told Ella one evening, as they sat together in her cramped quarters. "Sooner or later, they'll find me. I need to act before that happens." But how Ella asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "You're just one man. You don't even know who to trust." "I have allies," Alden said firmly. "Loyal men and women who would die for the crown. I just need to reach them." Ella hesitated, her heart aching at the thought of him leaving. She had grown to admire his strength, his conviction, but more than that, she had grown to care for him in a way she hadn't expected. "You'll need help," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Alden looked at her, his expression softening. "I've already asked too much of you, Ella. You've risked your life just by letting me stay here. Then let me risk it a little more," she said, her gaze steady. "You can't do this alone. And if there's a chance, just a chance that we can stop the people who did this to you, then I'll do whatever it takes." Alden stared at her for a long moment, his gray eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something that made Lila's breath catch. "Thank you," he said quietly. But the danger was closer than either of them realized. One cold, moonlit night, as Ella returned to her quarters, after a long day of work, she noticed something strange. The door to her room was slightly ajar, the faint glow of her lantern spilling out into the hallway. Her heart raced as she stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. Alden was gone before she could cry out. A rough hand clamped over her mouth, and a voice hissed in her ear. "Not a sound, girl. If you value your life, you'll do exactly as we say." Leia's blood turned to ice. The mercenaries had found them. Lila's body went rigid as the cold steel of a blade pressed against her side. The rough hand over her mouth silenced the scream that clawed at her throat. Her heart pounded wildly, her mind racing with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Good girl," the gruff voice murmured the stench of all, and sweat thick on his breath. "No need to get yourself hurt. Just do as we say." The mercenary dragged her farther into the room, releasing her only when he was certain she wouldn't bolt. Ella spun around her eyes, darting to the dark corners of her small quarters. Two men stood in the shadows, their faces obscured by the flickering light of the lantern. "Where is he?" One of them demanded, his voice low and threatening. He stepped forward, revealing a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. His dark eyes bored into hers, unyielding. Hula said, trying to keep her voice steady, though it trembled with fear. The man, the scarred one, growled, "Don't play games with us, girl. We know you've been hiding him." Leia's mind raced. She had no idea where Alden had gone, or if he was even still alive. The thought sent a pang of terror through her chest, but she forced herself to meet the mercenary's gaze. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice firmer this time. "I live here alone," the scarred man sneered, taking another step closer. "Lying isn't going to save you. We found his blood here. We know he was here." The other mercenary, the one who had grabbed her, chuckled darkly. Maybe she needs a little encouragement to remember where he went. Layla flinched as he reached for her, but before he could lay a hand on her, the door burst open with a deafening crash. Alden stood in the doorway, his dark cloak billowing around him, and his expression a mask of fury in his hand, was a dagger, its blade gleaming in the lantern light. "Let her go," he commanded, his voice low and lethal. The two mercenaries froze, their eyes narrowing as they took in the man before them. "Well, well," the scarred one said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Look who decided to join us. The king himself." Alden's grip on the dagger tightened, his gray eyes burning with rage. "I won't ask again," the scarred man laughed. "You're in no position to make demands, your majesty. You've got no army, no allies. You're nothing but a man running from his own shadow. Then come and face me," Alden said, stepping farther into the room. "Or are you afraid to fight without a dozen men at your back?" The scarred man's smile faltered, and for a moment it seemed he might take the bait. But before he could act, Alden moved with a speed that left Lila breathless. Alden lunged at the mercenary closest to her, the one who had threatened her. The man barely had time to react before Alden's dagger plunged into his shoulder, sending him crashing to the floor with a howl of pain. "Ella, get behind me," Alden barked, his voice sharp. She didn't hesitate. Scrambling to her feet, she darted behind him, her heart pounding as the second mercenary drew his sword. The scarred man advanced, his movements cautious now, his scar twisting as he sneered. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that, but it won't save you." Alden said nothing, his stance steady as he prepared for the attack. The fight was brutal and swift. The scarred mercenary was skilled, his sword striking out with deadly precision, but Alden moved with a grace and power that took Leia's breath away. He blocked and parried, his dagger a blur as he deflected the larger man's blows. It was over in moments. With a final calculated strike, Alden disarmed the scarred man and drove the hilt of his dagger into his temple. The mercenary crumpled to the floor. Unconscious, Alden turned to the first mercenary, who was still groaning in pain on the floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Tell whoever sent you," Alden said coldly, "that I'm not dead, and I'm coming for them." The man's eyes widened in fear, and he scrambled to his feet, stumbling out of the room without a backward glance. The room fell silent, save for the sound of Laia's ragged breathing. Alden turned to her, his expression softening as he sheathed his dagger. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Stepping closer, Ella shook her head, though her hands still trembled. "I'm fine," she said, quietly. Alden reached out his hand, brushing against her arm. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice filled with guilt. "I should have stayed. I never should have left you alone." "You saved me," Ella said, looking up at him. "That's all that matters for a moment." They simply stood there, the weight of what had just happened hanging heavily between them. Finally, Alden stepped back, his expression hardening. "It's not safe here anymore. They'll come back. And next time, they won't stop until they find me or kill anyone who stands in their way." Leia's chest tightened at his words. "What are we going to do?" "We have to leave," Alden said firmly, "tonight." By the time the moon reached its zenith, Alay and Alden were already on the road, the lights of Blackthorn Village. Fading into the distance behind them, Leia's heart ached as she left behind the only life she had ever known. But she knew Alden was right. Staying would only put them both in greater danger. "Where are we going?" she asked as they trudged through the forest, the air cold and biting to Raven Hollow. Alden replied, "It's a small village on the far edge of the kingdom. There's someone there I can trust, someone who can help us." "Who a knight Alden said his name is Sir Ryland. He was my father's most loyal protector, and he fought by my side before the ambush. If anyone can help us, it's him. Ella nodded, though a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. She had no idea what awaited them in Raven's Hollow, but she trusted Alden as they walked. She found herself watching him closely, studying the lines of his face, the determination in his eyes. He was more than just a king. He was a man carrying the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. And despite the fear that gripped her, Ella couldn't help but feel drawn to him by dawn. They had reached the outskirts of the forest, the faint outline of a village visible in the distance. But before they could take another step, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the morning stillness. Alden froze, his hand flying to the hilt of his dagger, as a group of riders emerged from the trees, their swords glinting in the pale light. "Stay behind me." Alden set his voice low and urgent. Layla's heart pounded as the riders surrounded them, their leader dismounting with a cruel smile. Well, the man said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Looks like we found the runaway king." The leader of the riders stepped forward, his boots crunching against the frost-covered ground. He was a tall, imposing man, with a hawk-like nose and a menacing presence. His armor gleamed under the pale morning light, marked with the insignia of House Farrand, a name Ella recognized as one of the noble families rumored to harbor ambitions of overthrowing the crown. Alden's jaw tightened as he placed himself between Lila and the armed men. His hand rested on the hilt of his dagger, though it was clear he was outnumbered. "Lord Fend sends his regards, your majesty," the leader said, his voice dripping with mockery. "A Chi-Kau, eager to reunite you with your precious throne, though of course you won't be sitting on it for long." Alden's eyes narrowed. "And who are you to speak for?" "Fend Captain Drayan," the man said with a flourish, his cruel smile widening. "I'm the one tasked with ensuring you don't cause any more trouble. My men and I have orders to bring you back alive if possible, but dead will do just as well. You'll regret underestimating me," Alden said coldly. Drawing his dog, Captain Dran chuckled darkly, signaling to his men with a flick of his wrist. Brave words for a man with no army. The soldiers moved to encircle them, swords glinting as they closed in. Leia's heart raced as she stepped back, her eyes darting between Alden and the approaching enemies. L.A. Alden said, his voice calm, despite the danger run. "Get to Raven's Hollow and find Sir Ryland. Tell him what's happened. I'm not leaving you," L.A. said firmly, her voice trembling. "You have to." Alden insisted, his gaze locking onto hers. "You're my only chance. If I fall here, someone needs to carry on the fight." Her chest tightened, but she knew he was right. She couldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. Before she could reply, one of the soldiers lunged at Alden, and the clearing erupted into chaos. Alden moved like a predator, his dagger flashing as he deflected the soldier's strike, and countered with a quick slash. The man cried out as he fell to the ground, clutching his bleeding arm. Another soldier charged forward, but Alden ducked under the swing of his blade, driving his elbow into the man's ribs, before spinning and delivering a swift kick to his knee. The soldier crumpled with a pained grunt. Despite his injuries, and the odds stacked against him, Alden fought with a ferocity that took Laia's breath away. He wasn't just a king. He was a warrior, a man who refused to give up even in the face of overwhelming danger. But the numbers were against him. For every soldier he incapacitated, 2 more took their place. "Get her," Captain Draven barked, pointing at Ella. Her blood ran cold as one of the soldiers turned toward her, his sword raised. She stumbled back, her mind racing for a way to defend herself. Her eyes fell on a heavy branch lying on the ground, and without thinking she snatched it up, gripping it tightly. As the soldier closed in, "Stay back," she shouted, her voice shaking. The soldier sneered, clearly unimpressed, and lunged at her. But Layla swung the branch with all her strength, catching him in the side of the head. The impact sent him staggering, and she used the moment to run, her heart pounding, as she darted toward the trees. Alden saw her fleeing out of the corner of his eye, relief washing over him, even as another soldier charged at him. He parried the attack, his muscles burning with exertion. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Your Majesty," Drevon said, drawing his own sword and stepping forward. "Surrender, and I'll make your death quick. Resist, and I'll make sure it's slow and painful." Alden glared at him, his chest heaving. "You'll have to kill me to take me back to Fend." "That can be arranged," Drevon said with a smirk. The two men clashed, Dren's sword meeting, Alden's dagger with a sharp clang of steel. Drevon was stronger, his strikes heavier, but Alden was faster, his movements precise and calculated. For a moment it seemed Alden might gain the upper hand. He dodged a powerful swing and countered with a strike that raised Dren's arm, but the captain recovered quickly, slamming the hilt of his sword into Alden's side. Alden stumbled, his vision blurring as pain shot through his body. "Enough of this," Drevon growled, raising his sword for the finishing blow. Before the blade could fall, a sharp whistle pierced the air, followed by the thewing of hooves. Leia turned just in time to see a group of riders emerge from the trees, their banners marked with the emblem of Eldenwood. A soaring hawk, the leader of the group, a tall man in gleaming armor, raised his sword and charged. "Into the fray for the king," he shouted, his voice ringing out like a battle cry. Alden's eyes widened in shock and relief as the reinforcements descended on Dren's men. The soldiers of House Farron faltered, caught off guard by the sudden attack. "Ryland," Alden murmured, recognizing the man leading the charge. Sir Ryland dismounted in one fluid motion, his blade cutting through the chaos as he reached Alden's side. "Your Majesty," Ryland said, his tone urgent. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Alden replied, though he was clearly struggling to stand. "What are you doing here?" "Ella," Ryland said, simply nodding toward the young woman, who had collapsed to her knees at the edge of the clearing, her chest heaving from the exertion of running. She found us. Alden's gaze softened as he looked at Ella, gratitude shining in his eyes. The battle was over quickly, outnumbered and outmatched. Dren's men retreated into the forest, their cries of defeat echoing through the trees. Ryland sheathed his sword, his expression grim as he turned to Alden. "Fenk Reach is growing. He said he won't stop until he has the crown, or your head. Then we'll stop him first." Alden said, his voice steady, despite his exhaustion. "But I can't do it alone." "You won't have to," Ryland said firmly. "Your loyalists are gathering in Raven's Hollow. They're ready to fight for you, Your Majesty." Alan nodded determination, hardening his features. "Then it's time we take back the kingdom." As the group made their way toward Raven's Hollow, Leia walked beside Alden, her body aching but her spirit. "Unbroken, you saved me," Alden said quietly, his voice filled with something deeper than gratitude. "We saved each other," Ella replied, her gaze steady. Alden smiled faintly, his heart swelling with admiration for the woman who had risked everything to protect him. For the first time in weeks, he felt a spark of hope, a belief that together they could overcome the forces arrayed against them. But the path ahead was far from clear, and as the shadows of war loomed ever closer, Alden and Lila would soon discover that the fight for the throne would test not only their strength, but their hearts as well. Raven's Hollow was a village on the edge of the kingdom, its remote location making it the perfect place for Alden's loyalists to gather in secret. Ella had expected a small group of knights and soldiers, but as they crested the hill overlooking the valley, her breath caught at the sight before her. The once quiet village had been transformed into a bustling military camp tent, stretched as far as the eye could see, their fabric emblazoned with the crest of Eldenwood smoke, rose from cooking fires, and the clang of steel rang out as blacksmiths sharpened swords and repaired armor, soldiers trained in groups, their voices echoing across the valley as they sparred and prepared for battle. "This is it," Alden said quietly, his gray eyes scanning the camp with a mixture of relief and resolve. "These are the men and women willing to fight for the crown for Eldon W. and for you," Ellie said softly, her gaze steady on him. Alden turned to her, his expression softening. "I wouldn't be here without you. Ella, you've done more for me than I could ever repay." She shook her head, a faint blush rising to her cheeks. "You don't owe me anything, Alden. I did what I thought was right, and that's why I trust you," he said, his voice low. Her heart fluttered at his words, but before she could respond, Sir Ryland rode up beside them, his expression grim. "Your Majesty," Ryland said. Bowing his head, "The captains are waiting to speak with you. They'll want to know the plan." Alden nodded, his demeanor shifting as he straightened and squared his shoulders. "I'll address them now." Inside the largest tent, the air was thick with tension as Alden stood before a group of his most trusted captains. Each one was a seasoned warrior, their faces lined with the weight of years spent defending Eldenwood. The time for hiding is over. Alden began, his voice steady in commanding Lord Fend, "And his allies have conspired to overthrow the crown and plunge this kingdom into chaos. If we do nothing, they will succeed, and Eldenwood will fall into the hands of tyrants." The captains nodded murmurs of agreement, rippling through the room. They've already made their move. Alden continued, "Farrand has sent mercenaries to hunt me down, and it won't be long before he moves against the villages and strongholds that remain loyal to the crown. We need to strike first." One of the captains, a burly man with a scar running across his forehead, stepped forward. "What's the plan?" "Your Majesty," Alden pointed to a map spread out on the table before them. "Fenn's forces are spread thin, but his seat of power is in High Reach. If we take High Reach, we cut the head off the snake. His allies will scatter, and the kingdom will be ours to rebuild." The captains exchanged glances, their expressions resolute. "It won't be easy," Ryland said, stepping forward. "High Reach is well fortified, and Fend has resources we can't match. But if we're smart, we can outmaneuver him." Alden's gaze swept across the room. "I won't lie to you. This will be dangerous. Many of us won't make it back. But if we don't act, Fend will tighten his grip on Eldenwood, and everything we've fought for will be lost." The captains nodded, their determination clear. "We fight for you, Your Majesty," one of them said, and for Eldenwood another added. Alden's chest swelled with pride and GR gratitude. "Then let's begin." The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparations. Soldiers trained tirelessly. Supplies were gathered and strategies were finalized. Ella found herself swept up in the energy of the camp, her fear gradually giving way to a quiet sense of purpose. She helped where she could, mending clothing, carrying water, and tending to the wounded. Though she wasn't a soldier, she knew she had a role to play in the fight ahead. But as the march to High Reach loomed closer, She couldn't shake the growing unease in her chest one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Alden found Lila sitting alone by the edge of the camp. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft, as he sat beside her. She glanced at him, her expression troubled. "I don't know. She admitted I want to believe we'll succeed. But what if we don't? What if all of this," she gestured to the camp behind them, "isn't enough?" Alden was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "There's always a chance we fail," he said finally. "But if we don't try, we'll lose everything. I can't promise we'll win LA, but I can promise that I'll fight with everything I have, for this kingdom, for these people, and for you." Her breath hitched, and she looked at him, her heart pounding for me. Alden turned to her, his gray eyes filled with emotion. "You've been my anchor, LA. When I was lost and broken, you gave me hope. I've spent my life fighting for a kingdom, but you've reminded me what it means to fight for something more, for someone who matters." Tears filled her eyes, and she looked away, her voice trembling. "I'm just a servant, Alden. You're a king. How can I matter to someone like you?" He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "You're not just a servant. You're brave, kind, and stronger than you realize. You've risked everything to stand by me, and I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You matter more to me than anything else in this world." Her tears spilled over, and she let out a shaky laugh. "You're going to make this impossible, aren't you?" Alden smiled his own voice. "Softening impossible for me to not fall in love with you," she whispered. He leaned closer, his heart hammering in his chest. "Then don't fight it." Their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and fierce. A moment of solace amidst the storm that loomed ahead the next morning. The camp was a hive of activity. As the soldiers prepared to march, Leia stood by Alden's side as he addressed the assembled troops, his voice ringing out with strength and conviction. "Today, we march, not as rebels, but as defenders of Eldenwood," he declared. "We march for justice, for freedom, and for the future of this kingdom. Together, we will take back what was stolen from us. Together, we will prevail." The soldiers erupted into cheers, their voices echoing across the valley. All turned to Ella, his expression solemn but hopeful. "Stay close to Ryland," he said. "He'll protect you." "And who will protect you?" she asked, her voice trembling. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. "I'll be fine. I have something worth fighting for now." Leia's chest ached as she watched him mount his horse and ride to the front of the column as the army began its march toward High Reach. She couldn't shake the feeling that the battle ahead would test not only their strength, but the love they had only just begun to share. The army's march to High Reach was slow, but deliberate. The closer they got to the fortress city, the heavier the air seemed to grow weighted by the knowledge of what lay ahead. High Reach was Lord Fenn's stronghold, a fortress perched at top, jagged cliffs, and guarded by impenetrable walls. It was the very heart of the rebellion, and the seat of the treachery that had appended Alden's life. Leia rode in a wagon near the rear of the column, her heart pounding as she watched the soldiers around her. They moved with grim determination, their armor gleaming in the morning sun, and their weapons ready for the fight ahead. Alden rode at the front with Sir Ryland and his captains, his posture straight and unyielding, despite the weight of what they were about to face. From time to time, his gaze would drift back to L.A., and she would meet his eyes with a small, reassuring nod. They hadn't spoken much since their kiss the night before, but the unspoken bond between them was stronger than ever. As the army crested the final hill, leading to High Reach, the fortress came into view. The massive stone walls loomed over the landscape, their battlements lined with Fen soldiers' banners, bearing the sigil of House. Fenned a black wolf on a crimson field, fluttered in the wind, a stark reminder of the enemy's strength. "They ready for us," Ryland muttered, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Alden nodded, his jaw tightening. "Good. Let them see. We not afraid the army set up camp, just outside the range of the fortress's archers. Fires were lit. Tents were erected, and captains moved among the soldiers, giving orders and finalizing strategies." Leia stayed close to Ryland, her nerves fraying as the reality of the battle ahead set in. "Do you think we have a chance?" she asked Ryland quietly, as they stood near the edge of the camp, watching the fortress in the distance. Ryland glanced at her, his expression grim but kind. "Alden is a great leader," he said. "If anyone can unite this army and take High Reach, it's him. But what if something happens to him?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Ryland's eyes softened, and he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "He's stronger than you think, and he has you to fight for. That's a powerful thing." "LA." Before she could respond, the sound of horns echoed across the valley, signaling the start of the battle. The assault on High Reach began at dawn. Alden's army advanced toward the fortress, in carefully coordinated waves, their shields raised to protect against the rain of arrows that rained down from the battlements. Siege engines rolled forward, their massive wheels creaking as they launched boulders and flaming projectiles at the walls. Leia stayed behind with the medics and supply wagons, her heart pounding as she watched the chaos unfold. The clash of steel and the shouts of soldiers filled the air, a symphony of war that sent chills down her spine. From her vantage point, she could see Alden at the front lines, his sword flashing as he fought with a ferocity that left her breathless. He moved like a force of nature, his strikes per ice, and unrelenting as he led his men toward the gates of the fortress. "Come on," she whispered under her breath, her hands clenched tightly. "You can do this. Inside the walls of High Reach." Lord Fend stood on the highest battlement, watching the battle unfold with a sneer. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, with a cruel smile and cold, calculating eyes. "They're more determined than I expected," he said, addressing his advisors. "But it doesn't matter. Our walls will hold, and by nightfall, their king will be dead, my lord." One of his men said hesitantly, "What if they breach the gates? Should we prepare for a retreat?" Fenk's smile faded, and he turned to the man with a glare that made him shrink back. "There will be no retreat. High Reach is impenetrable. Let them throw themselves against our walls. It will be their undoing." As the hours dragged on, the tide of the battle began to shift. Alden's forces breached the outer defenses, forcing Fenn's men to retreat deeper into the fortress. The gates groaned and splintered under the weight of the battering ram, and with a deafening crash they gave way. Cheers erupted from Alden's soldiers as they surged forward, their spirits buoyed by the sight of their king leading the charge. But the battle was far from over inside the fortress. The fighting grew even more brutal. The narrow corridors and staircases became choke points, forcing Alden's soldiers to fight for every inch of ground. Ella could only watch from the safety of the camp, her heart aching with every passing moment. She had wanted to stay out of the fight, to leave the battlefield to the soldiers and knights. But as the hours wore on, a gnawing sense of dread took hold of her. She couldn't just sit there, not knowing if Alden was alive or dead. I have to go, she said suddenly, standing and grabbing a satchel of bandages and supplies. One of the medics grabbed her arm. Are you mad? It's chaos out there. You'll be killed. I can't just sit here, she said, her voice shaking. I have to find him before the medic could stop her. She darted toward the battlefield, her heart pounding as she wooed through the chaos inside the fortress. Alden and Ryland fought side by side, their swords cutting through Fenn's men as they pushed toward the central keep. We're close, Ryland shouted over the den of battle. Farron is in the Great Hall. Alden nodded his face, set with determination. Leighton finished this. They burst into the Great Hall. Moments later, their boots echoing against the stone floor. At the far end of the room, Fenn stood surrounded by his guards, his expression one of calm disdain. You've come a long way to die, Your Majesty, Farron said, his voice cold. Eldon stepped forward, his sword raised. Your rebellion ends here. Fend the room erupted into chaos as the two forces clashed. Meanwhile, Ella navigated the labyrinth and corridors of the fortress, her breath coming in short gasps as she searched for any sign of Alden. She turned a Kiowar corner and froze her heart, lurching, as she saw Fenn's guards engaged in a fierce battle with Alden and Ryland. Without thinking, she darted forward, grabbing a fallen sword and rushing to their aid. Ella, no. Alden shouted as he saw her, his voice filled with panic, but it was too late. One of Fenn's men turned toward her, his sword raised. Ella barely managed to block the strike, her arms trembling under the force of the blow. Alden roared in fury, cutting down the man in a single stroke, before pulling Ella behind him. What are you doing here? He demanded, his voice filled with equal parts anger and fear. I couldn't leave you, she said, tears streaming down her face. Alden's expression softened, but before he could respond, Farron lunged at him, his blade aimed at Alden's heart. The next moments passed in a blur. Alden dodged the attack, his sword flashing as he parried and countered. The two men fought with a ferocity that shook the very walls of the great hall. Finally, with a well-timed strike, Alden disarmed Fend and drove his blade through the traitor's chest. Fend fell to the ground, his lifeless eyes staring up at the ceiling. The battle was over. High Reach had fallen, and Alden's forces emerged, victorious as the soldiers cheered, and the banners of Fend were torn down. Alden turned to L.A., pulling her into his arms. You're reckless, he said, his voice shaking, but you're the bravest person I've ever known. She smiled through her tears. I couldn't let you do this alone. Alden cued her face in his hands, his gray eyes filled with love. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing: I want you by my side always. And I'll be there, Elewith whispered as the sun rose over the fortress, casting its golden light on the battered but victorious army. Alden and Ella stood together, ready to rebuild the kingdom and their future together.